Well, hi there, and welcome to Mars X3D. This is your buddy Dave, and if you are new here, we are very glad you're here. You'll want to learn X3D viewing and join the rest of us proud weirdos who have mastered that particular superpower. Really cool. It turns your entire computer into a window right onto the surface of Mars. This is episode 4. Where we take a look at the weird things we find on Mars. Very often, we find things that can't be classified, but are really strange, and that appear to not be there by accident. Of course, it is an alien world, and anything that we find there is by its very nature alien. We won't necessarily understand it. But let's take a look now at some of our best evidence this past year for what we call weird. We'll wrap things up today with some great finds by Rami Barilan. This first one really does look like a pelican skull, doesn't it? We know that Mars was a water planet, just like Earth. So it only makes sense that pelagic birds would be present as a life form. For those of you from Iowa, pelagic means pertaining to the open sea, which you don't have in Iowa. Well, you have the Mississippi, of course, but that's not quite the same. So that's probably why you've never heard the word before, and besides, it's not a word commonly found in comic books. And how is this for some first-class weirdness? It's actually a pretty cool bit of sculpture that, I wouldn't mind having in my own garden. There are some interesting markings on it, and of course that little gear-like bit of strangeness inside the symmetrical opening down front. Here's another one from Rami way back in 2015. His finds are often quite blurry, but also they're really worth taking a look at anyway. This looks like an intake scoop of some kind to me. It's hard to tell if the depression on top is square or circular, but you can see from the lighting that it opens into the interior of the scoop. And did you notice that perfect ring down center front? You can see that Curiosity's body is photobombing this one on the left. So once again, why, in the name of disclosure, is this object so blurred out if it's only feet away from the rover? I don't know about you, but what my imagination conjures up is a head-on view of a chicken. You've got a head, a beak, tail feathers, wings, and you even have what looks like a chicken foot down there on the left. I can hear all the fringe elements on Facebook and elsewhere proclaiming with absolute certainty that this is, in fact, a Martian chicken, perhaps even an ancient idol, carved in anticipation of that finger-licking sky god, Colonel Sanders. This is one more example of why it's important to not only stay objective and rational, but to focus, whenever possible, on non-fractal anomalies, rather than fractal ones like our stone chicken here. This rock gives us just enough data points to allow our minds to conjure up the image of a hen. Now, if it was a razor-sharp statue of a chicken, say complete with a rectangular base and some letter-like inscriptions along the bottom, well, that'd be something, wouldn't it? But it's not. I don't claim to be right every time, far from it, but I'll always endeavor to give you what you deserve. The truth. Let's start out today with one of Rami Barilan's finds from 2020. He calls this a head, although I see it more as a possible mechanism. We're probably both wrong, but it's clear from the non-fractal shapes that this is not natural. Did you know? Rami often does paintings of his finds, and they're quite interesting. You'll want to check those out at his website, linked down below. Rami is always good for some great finds, and I like his formatting, which is why I try to keep it intact for these 3D renders. I have to say, this looks like a mechanism to me. That rounded part in front with 3 circular pieces on it makes me wonder if these are dials of some kind. Of course, the resolution is so pathetic that we can't really know for sure. No fault of Rami's. That's NASA up to its old tricks again. And people sometimes wonder why we put all those colors in there. The truth of the matter is, we don't. Those colors are in the original image, and they appear once you do the color balancing and curves on any particular image. In other words, we have no idea if these colors are real. We're just working with what we've got. Now, for all you proud weirdos, you know who you are. I know your minds are in the gutter, so let's just deal with the 800-pound gorilla in the room right now. We have a giant, schmeckle lying on the surface of Mars. So, were ancient Martians anatomically similar to humans? Is this a priapic edifice toppled at the height of its glory, perhaps erected as part of an ancient fertility temple? Whatever it is, it's a fascinating and then somewhat disturbing find, and at maybe 6 to 8 feet long, it definitely gives me feelings of inadequacy. It's clearly cylindrical, it's got those ridges and lines on its surface, and it certainly appears to be polished. And I think that's enough of that. Let's move on and take a look at this really messy screen door. This is a process they call bayering, like Bayer aspirin, and it renders a screen door effect. And my understanding is that this is a preliminary data product process that breaks it down to RGB, red, green, blue, for later color. But we don't have that color and probably won't for months, 3, 4, 5 years from now. So have a look what happens when we get rid of the screen door. Yeah, the lights really come on, don't they? This is one sent in to me just recently by a new researcher, Nurul Iman Supardi. I hope I pronounced that right. And you can see it up there, top center. Personally, I think this is really cool. I don't know what it is, but look at the shape. Let your eyes play over this whole thing from front to back and left to right. And then tell me that erosion did this. But actually keep it to yourself, okay? This is a big old chunk of amazing to me. First of all, what in the world would cause this kind of erosion in a rock? And what kind of rock would give this kind of appearance? You can see for yourself all the wires and components mashed together. It looks like the remains of a Borg cube, but forget science fiction. This entire boulder is absolutely fuzzy with wires and components sticking out, plus one very important distinction. This is real. It's not science fiction, and trolls can claim that we have fevered imaginations, but there's very little left to the imagination here. My thanks again to Raymond Glassford for passing these along to me. Lately, I've been going back to some of my earlier work and redoing the processing in the 3D. I downloaded the IMG and LBO files from the Endless Notebook and processed them, and then went to work. We're focusing on the yellow target in this context view, and there's really not much to see until you get up close. This is my original 3D rendition of the find, and while it's not too bad for a freehand attempt over 4 years ago, there's a lot of things that are just wrong for where I'm at now as a 3D weirdo. So I redid it, and this is what I got. This is a much more accurate representation of what's actually present, but it does beg a couple of questions. See those vertical JPEG artifacts on the rocks in the upper right background? And can you see the fainter ones in the foreground rocks? For that rocket-shaped object on the square pedestal in the foreground, are those just JPEG artifacts giving the appearance of it being a rocket with ringed sections on it? In fact, maybe these are just two slabs of rock that happen to have the same upward tilt, and those JPEG artifacts just make them look like something artificial. But then if you're going to ask that question, you also got to ask this one. How come the rings or stripes are perpendicular to the cylindrical shape of the rocket? And how come the square's stripes are perpendicular to its edge? Maybe there's something I just don't understand here, but shouldn't all the JPEG artifacts be arranged in the same direction throughout the image? I'm going to leave this one hanging for now. Sarah Runcie has been pretty busy lately, and she's been finding some interesting things, and this one is down there in the yellow target, down in the center. And wait till you have a look at this. This is a strange one. And yeah, I know it's blurry, but you can see okay in 3D, can't you? This reminds me of a little bug-eyed critter whistling a tune. Of course, that's not what it is. I have no idea what it is. Maybe you could offer a suggestion? We're looking at a rock, a J rock I'm calling it, that's all even thickness and very neatly bent down at the bottom, a very nice radius. So, is this an artifact? I don't know. But I would like someone to explain to me just exactly how rock would bend in this fashion. Is it perhaps metal? Is it perhaps something else? But again, not enough non-practical math present to just call it a straight-up artifact. But it is very strange and compelling. Here's another one that's off there on the skyline inside the green target. Kind of hard to see from here, and it's a strange thing to call it Patrick, but you'll find out why in just a moment. Now you gotta admit, inside the blue box, that's some pretty strange stuff. Whatever that is, it doesn't conform to any erosional properties that I'm aware of. But why call it Patrick? Now, any of you who have raised kids have had to watch your share of SpongeBob SquarePants, and I got tickled looking at this thing because it reminded me of SpongeBob's starfish friend, Patrick. Even has a tummy on it, just like Patrick does. And before we leave Patrick behind, I wanted to point out the rectangular blocks in this image. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them that I can see. There's probably more. But we are in the middle of a bunch of structural debris. And here's a little eye candy from researcher Rami Barilan. And you know, that looks so much like a hairdryer, or maybe a vent, an air conditioning vent in a car. Who knows what it is? But Rami, as usual, finds some amazing things. Check out his website, RamiBarilan.com, where he has all kinds of goodies up for you to look at. We'll wrap things up today with a intriguing find by Rami Barilan, and he's calling this a disc, and obviously it is a disc, or we can assume that it is based on what we're seeing, but what it actually is we don't know. UFO, a carving, a fossil, and what are those little openings that we find in the front? This is a good one, and Rami always leaves us scratching our heads. Here's one an anonymous avatar pointed out. In 3423, Nev's GMAC of that particular sol, and as we get in closer, you'll see why I call it mouse in the house. Look at all those mouse holes all around the bottom edge of this rock, if it is a rock. They're all the same size, pretty much, all pretty symmetrical, and the one in the center has kind of a lip around it. So, is this some kind of burrowing creature? Is it a decorative piece that is upside down, perhaps, or broken off of a building? Hard to say, but it did remind me of another one that I saw earlier, maybe a year or two ago. See what I mean? Same shape, same little lip around the hole. And as a matter of fact, this is about the same size as the holes that we saw in the previous slide. So whether it's a critter making this, or a little humanoid, or it's architectural, or maybe it's just geological, but it doesn't seem that way to me. As we dive right into NASA's noodle, well, as you look at this in X3D, it's really wonky inside the circle there. What happened? Well, what likely happened is that there was some wind that blew the strands of the noodle between exposures, and thus resulted in the wonky 3D you see here. Or it could be manipulation of the image by NASA. We really don't know. I've gone in and adjusted the contrast and fiddled with the parallax so that this appears more like it would if you were standing over it and taking a look down at your feet. So what do you think? Is this a noodle? Is it a piece of string or binding from the Perseverance rover? Or is it something organic? Well, let's take one more closer look at it before we move on. I have confirmation bias just as much as you do, and I would love for this, whatever it is, to be native to Mars. It would be quite a discovery. But as long as we have a plausible explanation for it, that is, that it originated with the a binding or other material with the Perseverance rover, well, we have to apply Occam's razor and move on. This is a classic anomaly presented by most of the major researchers in the community from way back in the second year of Curiosity's epic and ongoing journey. Just celebrated 10 years, right? It was just offered up again the other day by Maria Conceição Coelho, the so-called running lady. Maybe you can figure out for yourselves from this context view that the running lady is maybe 4, possibly 5 inches tall. The idea that most people have is that this tiny running lady is dashing towards the rover, her hands raised up in alarm, and the act of her running through the sand, kicking up a cloud of dust behind her. Let's examine that premise. Notice how this block, which by the way is an actual artifact, it's straight as an arrow along its top edge. If this were a dust cloud raised by little feet pounding through the sand, there would be convection currents associated with it. For those of you from Iowa, that means there would be little puffs like you see in a cloud. You know, those big white floaty things up in the sky. The last thing you would see is a dust cloud arranging itself in a straight line. If you take a close look at the heads and the arms, you can see that this is a rock formation lying in the sand some distance behind the block. In a two-dimensional photograph, it only appears to be part of the block in front of it. But like I said a moment ago, the block itself is anomalous. Not only does it have a multitude of right angles in 3 dimensions, it's also uniformly shaped, with that side on the left being perfectly flat. But look at the lower right-hand corner of the block and tell me, what do you see there? Let's take a closer look at that. Once again, we find what reminds me of a ventilation fan, or maybe it's carving. More than likely, it's something entirely different from what we can imagine. Bottom line, this block, along with whatever this little structure is an artifact. But the bottom line on the running lady ain't no such critter. This one is really compelling to me. My friend Maria Conceição Coelho shared this one the other day, and I gotta say, it pulled me up short. There may be a perfectly rational explanation for how this triangular boot print was formed. And I might open to suggestions if you've got them. As far as I know, there's nothing on the rover that had caused this. And if there is, then this is the first time I've seen any sign of it in 10 years worth of images. Those ridges remind me of Neil Armstrong's boot print on the moon, but it's totally the wrong shape. And before we leave this one, in this blow-up you can see that little squiggle that looks like, kind of like the letter E, right where the toe would be. Now, was this formed as part of the print, or was this already there, or did whatever this is step on a tiny critter? Well, we'll never know, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Here's a good one from Sarah Runcie, something I'm calling a stand-up artifact. It's totally strange to have this thing just sticking up in the air, especially in the middle of large, flat rocks that seem to make up the hillside. See what I mean? 2 parallel sides, both matching, with a nice, even gap between them. Then there's that piece sticking up at the top, like it's giving us the finger. Even though I'm calling it an artifact in the info box, it's probably more accurate to call this an artifact candidate. I don't know about you, but if I was hiking in the desert and saw this thing, I would absolutely have to go over and check it out. Of course, that's just me because I have curiosity, unlike curiosity, which doesn't seem to have curiosity. Curious, isn't it? For all you proud weirdos out there, you know who you are. Stay safe and stay weird. And stay tuned for episode 5, Structures.